So, how is a short story influenced by the historical and social context in which the authors create the story? The short story as a genre has made its way through the centuries and has adopted the change in society. The different thoughts that have made history as well as the social context in which the authors of short stories build their story have had a great impact on their writing. Indeed, the authors write fiction based on life experience, social conventions, and social classes.
Hence, shorts carry different point of views depending on the social context that surrounds them. Therefore, while there has been significant change and improvement in society between the 1800s and today, the short stories have evolved through the characterization of the protagonist and the point of view of the short story. We have decided to focus on two social issues that mark the North American history: the discrimination against women and other races. In fact, both were serious issues in society years ago, whereas today everyone is considered equal in our society.
We can compare the outside world's change in society to the evolution of the short story and realize how the social context has an impact on the author's writing.
First, the social classes once were an essential part of the North American society and affected the writing of short fiction. In fact, as the standards proposed that whites were more powerful, the upper-class heroes of the short stories written in those years are often found to be white men or women.
This relation to the social classes carries a different point of view on racial discrimination, as the authors create their characters in a way to satisfy every reader. The social context in which they write fiction influences them.
Authors tend to write stories that correspond to the reality to get the readers to appreciate their work. For example, the short stories written before the ratification of the 13th Amendment illustrate mostly upper-class protagonists. Usually, this hero has a lot of power and owns slaves.
Since it was usual back then to own slaves, the authors mention it in their work more as a representation of the protagonist's wealth than as a way to criticize slavery. The point of view of the authors toward this issue is therefore based on the anomalies in sociality.
Considering the social interactions between upper-class whites and blacks in reality, the authors used to create context where the powerful characters were the most important ones, whereas the black characters did not take part of the story that much. As you know, Faulkner's A Rose for Emily illustrates the life of an upper-class lady as she's slowly getting past the old generation.
In that short story, as in many others, the protagonist is indeed a white powerful woman living with her slave Toby. In Germany, while Adolf Hitler was the leader of the NSDAP, discrimination towards all people who did not correspond to the leader's ideal of humankind influenced the writer of the authors all around the world.
This is another example of social issue that can affect the characterization of the protagonist of short stories and lead the point of view of the authors towards the issue.
In today's work, the point of view of the society on subservience and racism is completely different, and also does it influence the authors in writing short stories. As we know, civil war occurred between 1861 and 1865 and had the objective to abolish slavery.
According to the Exploring Constitutional Conflicts website, the 13th Amendment was ratified in the United States in December 1865, concluding the abolition of slavery in the American states. The blacks were also officially made citizens of the United States of America.
This amendment changed literature as the social context changed itself. Indeed, authors begin writing stories in which the physical appearance of the character is irrelevant to their place in the story. Since the abolition of slavery in the United States, slavery is still abhorred in works but with a different point of view.
The authors often expose the issues related to slavery all around the world to make the readers realize the conditions certain blacks are still living today. For instance, Ursula Le Guin and Nadine Gordimer both illustrate those conditions in their respective works, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas and The Ultimate Safari.
Those two writers have used ways to make the readers aware of the impacts of their action on the poor and Africans. There are only two examples of the change of the writing of the short stories. In other words, the outside words, people are being more aware of the condition of the blacks in Africa.
Consequently, the authors of short stories tend to tell the lives of Africans, as racism is still an issue in too many countries. Nowadays, as the skin color does not affect the way an individual is treated, the protagonist can be found to be black and can lead a normal life or make people realize the conditions of other races in Africa, for instance.
Second, the inequalities between men and women have been an everlasting issue through the years. In the 1800s, women were assumed to value less than men.
Their occupations were to take care of the house, do all the chores, and act as the subservient of every man around them.
They didn't have much job opportunity as a woman, were forbidden or had difficulty getting an education after 16 years old.
This was the reality of women back in the 1800s, and the short stories written in those years illustrated this issue. In fact, in the early works, the woman takes care of the husband and stays home to take care of the children and house.
As a comparison, men were considered to be stronger, more powerful, more intelligent than women, for they have access to higher education. Therefore, the gap between genders have had an impact on the way writers build a story. The perspective from which the story is told can come from the author's own gender, as this issue concerned them.
As you know, Nadine Gordimer's The Ultimate Safari presents a female protagonist, and as we analyzed in class, the grandmother of the young protagonist is described as a strong woman we can count on. The grandmother is the leader of the group, and in contrary to the short stories based on the past thoughts towards gender equality, the man is the one dependent, as the grandfather is dependent of the grandmother.
Also, to her, education is primordial. She passes those values to her grandchild and teach them about surviving. In the past, women had difficulty having access to education, which can explain why she thinks her grandchildren should take benefits from it.
Moreover, the physical distinction between men and women suggests the weakness of women opposed to the strength of men. This had also limited the women's jobs opportunities and precluded them from having their own identity. Women were associated with their husband and were assumed to be less important.
The social issue influenced the short stories as the protagonists were more oftenly male. For example, most superheroes are masculine gender. A superhero is said to be strong, fearless, intelligent, and gentle. However, extremely small in the number of female superheroes. This relates to the reality where women can perform at anything.
The most known Marvel superheroes are found to be in majority male characters: Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, Ant-Man. It is only since 1963, 25 years after the creation of the Marvel Worldwide, that female heroes were added to the super team. Today, only 9 female superheroes made the team over a total of 45 Marvel heroes.
Indeed, women were not seen as capable of doing incredible things as much as men could, which relies to the fact that in the past women could not work. In short stories, a strong and independent character would be characterized as a white, tall man.
Another good example would be the gap between male and female characters in fairy tales. Indeed, in every good princess story, the prince faces challenges to finally save the princess. This normality and repetition in every fairy tale depicts the gap between genders. Women are considered to be the weak ones, whereas the men are strong and have the power to overcome any challenge.
The princess, being in need for help, illustrates the dependence of women toward men. In fact, in the past, as women did not work, their needs were satisfied by men. This suggests the absolute dependence of women, which also questions their capacities.
To summarize, the social gap between men and women has influenced the characterization of the heroes of the stories and has presented a different point of view on this issue.